Okay, welcome back. Yes, we've seen Mr. Wale Smart. He's here with us this morning. Wale Smart Oyerinde is the DG Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA. So, employers, not employees.
Employers.
Oh, dear. Oh, boy. Okay, where does that leave us? We're out of the equation. All right, thank you for coming on anyways. But
thank you.
The government has announced this measure to see how they could cushion the impacts of the subsidy removal on regular Nigerians. The states appear to be in the driver's seat driving this policy. Do you think this will be, what kind of impact do you see this having?
Well, good morning once again, and thanks for having us. You know, I think good intention, but it still brings us back to the issue of framework. You know, how exactly will the 5 billion, how exactly will it be distributed? For what purpose exactly will the 5 billion be put to? You know, looking at where we were before now and what brought us to this point. You know, the first subsidy removal created a shock that snowballed into many other issues. Now, you cannot be complaining about the effect and feeding the cost. So for us to be, let's look at the first subsidy issue. The removal created increase in transport cost, you know, affected the purchasing power of an average Nigerian worker and the household as it were, and also create different kind of effects in the lives of an average individual. Now, whatever solution we are bringing, for us, we first to address the root cause of it. Will the 5 billion be used to mitigate the effect? You know, the main issue of the first subsidy. Fuel is now hovering close to 600 in some places, close to 700 in some places. Now, will the amount that is being given to the state, will it be judiciously used in such a way that to actually impact the life of those that the government have selected to benefit from those funds? So for us, it's less of the amount, but what exactly is the framework that will be used, that the 5 billion will be used for? If you don't create a framework, if you don't create a path, that 5 billion will trickle down to those that are supposed to get, then you will have created another system.
And the thing is, the federal government cannot, because they say, look, we run a federal system. We can't force down the throat of states how they should do things.
Well, you are the one giving them the money.
Yeah, but grants, which they will pay back, some of them. And so, yes, they expect that the states will have proper framework. So now, aren't we already in a bind? Because we went ahead and removed the subsidy, but there's question about this same framework. Yeah. What is a credible database? How would you ensure that this gets to the very grassroots from then up to people who need it? I don't think you think we'll have this proper framework already.
No, we don't. And those are part of the mistakes or the errors of the last administration. We have many schemes that were created by the past administration without verifiable data. And once you don't have credible data, then you are starting the whole project on a very faulty foundation. And once the citizenry are not aligned, or those projects have credibility issues, then you have set a system where the project is going to fail already. So without that issue, you know, the data that was used for coming up with the poorest of the poor in Nigeria, it's already been contested, not only by labor but also by employers. How exactly do we arrive at that figure? We are touting 133 million Nigerians that are poorest of the poor, multidimensionally poor. How do we arrive? What are the parameters that we used in arriving at those figures? Are the parameters, are they transparent enough for us to know, look, this is actually the amount of persons that are actually poor or multidimensionally poor? And fundamentally, the issue remains the issue of data. Even the issue of fuel consumption, you know, there was contention about how many liters exactly we are consuming. You know, we have an issue where the former Chief of Customs went to the National Assembly to also contest the liters touted by NNPC as consumption per day. So if we don't get the data right, then we have created a system where people can always game the system.
Do you think that, do you actually see proper intention from government across board to come up with data? I ask this because before we came up with this, the last system of elections, I know several parts are still in court. Yeah. States used to produce 3 million 2-point-something million votes. When they introduced that system, then dropped drastically. And then you see similar things in several other sectors. And so some people will actually wonder, if we actually come with proper data, it will speak to the reality. I mean, we saw that too with fuel consumption. Yep. Now that subsidy is gone, look at the amount of cars on the roads. Dropped drastically. Absolutely. The consumption dropped drastically. That's a real figure. So many would then ask, do you see us actually coming up with that proper data?
It's possible. You know, if it's done somewhere else, and the people that have done it somewhere else, they're not angels. And for us, it trickles down from government. The intention, as your previous speaker said, it trickles down from the intention of government. If government is sincere with getting the data, and if other stakeholders are also focused in driving the conversation about this data, then we'll put the government under pressure, multidimensional pressure.
It's not that difficult to get,
if you allow me. It is not difficult to get the data. It's absolutely not difficult to get the data. But the intention and the desire to do it is probably what is lacking. Some will call it political will to do it. Because if you don't do it, you have created systems for yourself to also game the system that you're trying to protect. So data we create, it's more like a leveler for us, an equalizer. Once you have the data, you can deal with the issue of those that are poor. You can deal, even the labor market information itself that we should have. How many jobs are created on a regular basis. How many people are losing their jobs? How many people must have lost their job last month? What are the rate of new job creation? We don't have credible labor market information. As simple as that.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, especially looking at it from the angle of employment. But this is not the first attempt of the government to try and give some palliatives. This one, they're doing it through the states. From what we understand, some parts of it will be grants, other parts of it will be loans. But in the president's speech, which he had issued earlier, I mean, which he gave earlier, he had talked about the manufacturing sector. I imagine that the manufacturing sector is also captured under the Employers Association.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, when you talk about framework, have you been able to find out under what framework the federal government intends to spend its 75 billion naira, which it has spoken about, to 75 enterprises before now?
Immediately the president announced those palliatives, those series of interventions. And one of the things we said first, that we can't announce without putting an implementation structure in place. And for us, you have to have a Minister of Trade and Investment to manage the interface with the manufacturers. If you are buying 3,000 buses or 300,000 buses, you need a Minister for Transport to do that interface for us. If you are talking of the issue of the national minimum wage, we need the Minister for Labour to be on ground to midwife that process. Without those structures in place, they remain announcements, they remain intention. And fortunately, the ministers have been confirmed, portfolios confirmed, inauguration on Monday as we had. And we're hoping that those ministers, once they are confirmed, once they go back to their ministries, then we should start implementation. As far as we are concerned, it's 75 billion, many other interventions, they remain pronouncements until we have that structure, because you need the ministers. You need the boards of agencies and agencies and parastatals. You need them on ground because they are the engine room that will drive that process. But without them on ground, they remain basically government's intention to do.
That's quite telling, because the president gave this speech on the 31st of July.
Yeah.
This is midway, or we're already more than midway into August. And as a result of a lack of structure to implement this, it's been very difficult for anyone to really know how, the president's plans were going to be actualized.
Before now, everybody was going to the villa with the president's advisors, a series of advisors playing so many roles. But now everybody cannot, manufacturers, transporters, service providers, all of us can be going to the center. It becomes overwhelming even for those around the president to work. So we need that structure, and the Minister of Finance also have to manage the disbursement of these funds. So without all those people in place, the permanent secretaries can absolutely do very little within the context of their role and their functions.
Well, we know that employers are situated in states, apart, of course, from those who are right here in the Federal Capital Territory. Before this announcement by the governors, I mean, after their National Economic Council meeting, have you heard anything from any government that you would have said, okay, this is what we think the number of states too should be looking at implementing before the announcement of yesterday?
Well, everybody was looking at the president,
the federal
government, waiting for pronouncement from the federal government. So you remember, and rightly so, that the states also, they are, most of them also, they go cap in hand to come to Abuja every month to collect allocation, which also compromises their ability to provide effective support to organized businesses. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3 states is creating that environment for organized businesses to survive. So it all boils down to the whole issue of are the state viable? Are the state creative enough? Or are the governments or the governors, are they creative enough to explore or to exploit the resources that they have, both natural and human resources?
Do you think they are?
You know, we have, there's no state you will go to in the country that you won't find one form of natural resources or the other. Nigerians have proved themselves out of this country. You know, people travel from Maiduguri to US, to UK, and they distinguish themselves very well. People travel from the west, from the north, and they distinguish themselves. Now, the question is, what is making them almost frustrated within this environment? We go back to the system. So if the governor is not creating or is not exploiting those resources, and we're all comfortable because we have oil, and oil is already giving us, is creating another dynamics for us, because it's basically all our problems, you know, you solve your problems through revenue from oil. You also create problems for yourself through the same issue of oil. So it becomes a cacophony of issues that you have to sit down and deal with. But those states are viable. We just need a focused government that will make those states maximize.
I am extremely disturbed by the fact that you say that no state, or, you know, maybe just a handful of states are holding any, you know, consultative meetings with employers of labor to find out, you know, what progress they can make and how they can make things easier. Because if the states which are closest to the businesses and closest to the people living in this state are not holding these meetings, is the federal government going to be meeting with every single business in Nigeria to find out how to help them?
Those are the big issues we have to deal with. You know, an average business in this environment is seen like a cash cow. You know, you come, you set up your business, then rather than the government providing the enabling environment first for you to sustainable create jobs. The more you create jobs, the more you employ the locals of those community. The more you employ, the more you generate revenue. The issue of personal income tax, you also make revenue from corporate tax. But most of them see organized businesses as a cash cow. So you start a business today, then you have agencies and quasi-agencies of the same state government coming to create serious bottleneck for such businesses.
Yes, but the cow has to be alive for it to continue to give you milk.
It has to be alive.
Yes.
It has, but for many of them, it's so unfortunate. And sometimes you wonder if they understand the concept of enterprise sustainability. Because everything, even national development, if you talk of GDP growth, talk of productivity, everything rests on sustainable enterprises. If you don't have sustainable enterprises, then you cannot develop.
Well, let's get to Lagos.
Yes, thank you, Chamberlain. You know, the concern is across board, not just with employers, but also with labor, Mr. Oyerinde. I wonder if, you know, state governors are having conversations with labor as well. And in that regard, there are some classes, in fact, quite a number of classes of Nigerians that are not represented in one form of government structure or agency, the informal sector, you know, those who are daily earners. How can they be captured under this palliative regime? Maybe we should start with that before I follow up.
You know, until we create the nexus and understand the nexus between all these variables between the employer sustainability, between labor, and also between the average Nigerian, the household, those in the informal sector. Now, let's look at the palliatives or the wage negotiation, wage adjustment that is being championed by labor. If you apportion or you approve 1 million naira as wage adjustment for labor, and each worker is going home with 1 million naira per month, if you don't deal with the issue of the macroeconomy, if you don't deal with the issue of ease of doing business, as the wage is going up, the cost of production will most likely also be going up. So at a point, your increase in wages will be neutralized by the increased cost of living. On the flip side, if you create an environment where businesses are sustainable, where cost of doing business is reducing progressively, it will naturally bring down the cost of goods and services, which will also benefit the workers and also benefit the average Nigerians. The government said they have a data of 133 million Nigerians that are multidimensionally poor. We are hoping, we are seriously hoping that that list is credible enough to capture as many persons as possible. But beyond the issue of the sharing, I think what we should be looking at, as I mentioned earlier, is we got to this point because of the removal of fuel subsidy. Increase in the cost of fuel, increase in the cost of energy, VAT on diesel that has been introduced. Now, how do we create a system where the cost of production will be less or be reducing for those operating at the informal sector? Because if we don't deal with that, you might give 5,000 naira per month, you might give 10,000 naira per month, you might even give 20,000 naira per month as palliatives. We might give each household a bag of rice per month or per year to survive. But if the cost of living continues to rise, it will continue to equalize in the negative, whatever palliatives you are giving Nigerians. So it is less of the sharing of the money, but it's a more fundamental issue of dealing with what are the critical issues that will make businesses more profitable, more sustainable, so that the effect can trickle down to the cost of living. If you don't deal with that, we'll continually be throwing money, we'll continually be throwing cash on problems that we can deal with through appropriate policies and appropriate regulation.
I'm wondering just how fair it will be to leave the informal sector to be at the mercy of the possible positive outcomes, of righting the wrongs in the economy. I believe that they should, somehow be captured under the distribution of the palliatives regime. But following up on, the president's speech, besides the funds that he announced for the manufacturing sector, there was also some funds announced to be distributed to small and medium-scale businesses as well. Should that also be, waiting in the wings for the inauguration of the cabinet, or shouldn't there have been some form of accountability from the governors on whether or not it is captured under this 5 billion naira intervention fund, or it will be catered to under the increase in the amount accruing to the states from the federation account?
Well, we want to believe that the announcement by the president earlier in August is a different intervention. The amount for the MSMEs, the nano businesses, the amount for the manufacturers, we want to believe strongly that it's different from the 5 billion that will be shared through the states. And for the MSMEs, good intervention, good comment by the president, but we are also concerned about how exactly are we going to generate those MSMEs. Let me give you an example. During the last CBN regime, a lot of interventions were made, a lot of grants were given, a lot of loans were given, purportedly to MSMEs, to SMEs. And we also know that there were reports that there was high rates of default in those loans. And during one of our engagements, when the CBN complained about high rate of default, the question we posed was this: how did you arrive at the MSMEs that you gave the loan? What were the due diligences that was made to make sure that those that actually needs the loan were the ones that collected it? Because we have a platform that is called the Organized Private Sector of Nigeria that has NECA as a member, that has MAN, Manufacturer Association of Nigeria, that has NASIMA, that has National Association of Small-Scale Enterprises, and National Association of Small-Scale Industrialists. Those 5 organizations constitute what we call the organized private sector.
It raises that question.
You have all strata of businesses represented.
Yeah.
Both in the small and small scale industry, the big industries. And we said, look, why not channel the loan or channel the intervention through this institution?
Well, it raises that question, Mr. Oyerinde, my sincere apologies for butting in. It raises that question of whether or not there is significant engagement, and I think that's one of the questions Malkwe asked you, earlier when we began this conversation. In that light, and talking about the cost of living, let me speak, directly to this one. It's the effect on the private sector that is actually important to me, and the resultant roll-on effect on employment. So given the rising cost of living and naturally rising cost of production, you may want to tell us what percentage cost has risen. Do you see a situation where there will be job cuts? If so, to what degree? Do you see an increase in rate of employment or rate of unemployment? If so, to what degree?
I think it's quite obvious to all of us. The answer to your question is obvious. We have, it's no more news that we have businesses, even multinationals, already relocating or divesting from the country, which is also a result, or partly a result of the inhospitable environment in which they are operating. So once a business is in distress, one of the options available for it is basically to reduce production. And as you reduce production, one of the consequences is either for you to cut jobs. If you don't cut jobs, you have a proper engagement with your stakeholders, including labor, to fashion out how do we navigate ourselves out of this distress. Definitely, one of those consequences, in most cases, is job losses. But for Nigerian employers, we must commend the resilience and doggedness of Nigerian businesses. I remember during COVID, at the height of COVID-19, when businesses were forced to shut down, we actually had an MOU with labor, with NLC TUC, that whatever the case might be, Nigerian employers will not sack workers, except it is absolutely necessary. And when I mean absolutely necessary, when it is absolutely difficult for the business to operate. And we kept to that MOU. And we have kept to that also sufficiently. But you also realize that businesses have stakeholders, they have shareholders, and once the environment becomes very, very inhospitable for you to operate, then you look at how do you survive. And one of those survival modes is either you shut down, you relocate, or you suspend production, which will naturally affect jobs, as it were. And as it affects jobs, it has so many other consequences within the context of our national life. So it's one of those consequences, job loss.
Or maybe they need to, Nigeria need to review that troubled asset recovery program of the states and see how it can improve, and then attend to companies here, because they are the employers. They have to keep businesses going. But absolutely, that's how far we can go. We do thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having us.
All right.